My parents told my brother he could take my house while I should live in a camper out back since I'm single and he has a wife and kids, and now they're acting like I'm selfish for being upset. Hey friends, welcome to Story Nest. Before we begin, tap that subscribe button. It helps a lot and means the world to us as we share these stories. I'm a guy in my early 30s, just living my life and doing the best I can. My younger brother, Lucas, is 29 and has a big family, 4 kids now. He started young, becoming a father at 22, and it's been a whirlwind ever since. The second child came a year later, the third followed 2 years after that, and the fourth was born just a few months ago. His wife, Emily, my sister-in-law, and I have always clashed. To be honest, I'm not sure if it's her personality or just the way she likes to push my buttons, but it's clear we don't get along. Emily loves to act like she's above everyone, particularly me. If I ever say something back, she turns into an absolute drama queen. It's like she has this ability to cry on cue, and suddenly, she's the victim. Everyone buys into it too, my parents, Lucas. They all adore her. And yes, I admit, she's beautiful. But beauty doesn't erase the fact that she's manipulative. She refuses to work, even though she has a college degree, and my mother helps take care of the kids. My brother's income is their only source of money. They live in my parents' house because they can't afford anything else. Privacy is non-existent with the whole family crammed into a small, outdated house. Growing up, it was obvious my brother was the golden child. We're 3 years apart, and our parents favored him from the start. I was punished severely if I ever stood up to him or retaliated against his annoying behavior. It was clear who they cared for more. He got everything he wanted, and if anyone pointed out the favoritism, our parents would go into damage control. Eventually, we moved far away, about 150 miles from our relatives. This kept the drama to a minimum, though it didn't stop the tension from building. Lucas was always getting away with things, including bullying me, and my parents ignored it, which hurt. I remember them telling me to suck it up, even when he was relentlessly flirting with my first girlfriend until she broke up with me. It seemed like everything that went wrong in my life was somehow my fault, according to them. They treated me like an afterthought, only making sure to show me equal treatment when others were around, but it never felt real. By the time I turned 18, I was done. I moved out right after high school, and while it wasn't the easiest time in my life, it was a huge relief. I didn't even care when they skipped my graduation. From then on, I only saw them during holidays, and even then, it was more out of obligation than anything else. Then came 2020, and everything fell apart. Like so many others, I lost my job at the start of the pandemic. It was a wake-up call that made me realize how unprepared I was. My rent was high for a 2-bedroom condo that I loved, but I had no way to renew the lease once my roommate and I both lost our jobs. I was barely scraping by on unemployment, so I had to sell most of my stuff to avoid being homeless. The condo wasn't worth the stress of barely being able to make rent. But I had a plan. My love for trucks had come in handy over the years, and I owned a decent one. So I bought a $1,000 camper and figured I could live out of it temporarily. I thought it would be a short-term solution, something to tide me over until I got back on my feet. The idea of living in my truck wasn't ideal, but it felt like the best option. I even thought about parking it at my parents' place for a while, where Lucas and his growing family were already living. They could at least help me out during this tough time. But when I asked my parents if I could park my camper in their driveway for a few months, they turned me down cold. They said their house was full and they didn't want the extra mess. They had no problem helping my brother, but when it came to me, they wouldn't budge. They even told me that if I wanted to park there, I'd have to pay them rent that was just shy of what I'd be paying for an apartment. It was insane. My mother was more than willing to help with the kids all day, but when it came to me, no help. So I found myself with no choice but to sleep in my camper in a parking lot on the first night. It was a scary experience. I had no idea how to navigate this new way of life. Every creak in the truck, every shadow in the parking lot had me on edge. And I didn't sleep well at all that first night. But what else could I do? There were no other options, and I wasn't about to give up. From that point on, I bounced around, looking for a safe place to park. The reality of living as a nomad set in, and it wasn't easy. I had to deal with people who didn't understand my situation, from beggars to aggressive drivers, and even confrontations with people who told me to leave because my camper was an eyesore. It was a hard lesson in humility. At one point, some stranger claiming to be from an HOA threatened me for parking my camper, even though I wasn't parked near any houses. The world felt like a hostile place. I had to sneak power from random outlets to keep my fridge running, learning the art of plugging in where I could. It was a low point, but I did what I had to do. Time passed slowly. I tried to find a job similar to what I had before, but opportunities were few and far between. I spent months living this way, focusing on survival. I had no privacy and no stability, but at least I was surviving. It wasn't easy, but every small victory, finding a place to park, getting a bit of work, managing to find a bathroom, felt huge. Eventually, things started to turn around. I found a new job in a neighboring city. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. I was still living in my camper, but at least I had some money coming in. Things were looking up, or so I thought. The new job didn't come without its challenges, though. I had to adjust to living so far from the city, and the days blurred together. I was working long hours, taking on every shift I could to make ends meet. My boss was kind enough to let me park my camper in an unused area behind the warehouse, where no one seemed to notice or care about the odd setup. It wasn't glamorous, but it was working. I could plug my camper in for electricity, and my boss allowed me to even set up the camper outside for extra space. It was far from perfect, but at least I had a bit of comfort in my life after months of uncertainty. The location was secluded enough that I didn't have to deal with the usual hassles of parking somewhere public. My camper was as close to a home as I had now. Still, life wasn't easy. I didn't have much personal space or privacy. I took the opportunity to shower at a local gym and even made some trips to a friend's apartment when I could, just to get a little normalcy. The camper was great for winter, thanks to a small electric heater, but summer was a nightmare. It didn't have air conditioning, so I had to invest in a used portable AC unit just to make the heat bearable. But despite all the discomforts, I pushed through. I had a job, and that was enough to keep me going. The most significant change came when I started getting some overtime hours and learned new skills from my coworkers. Eventually, I earned a promotion. I became a supervisor, and the pay was better than I had ever imagined. My hard work was finally paying off. I was beginning to regain a sense of stability that I hadn't felt in years. But it didn't end there. One day, I realized just how far I'd come. The decision to buy a house didn't seem as impossible anymore. I spent months looking for a place. Something close to work, but also a place that felt like a permanent home. And after a lot of searching and some careful budgeting, I found it, a 3-bedroom manufactured home, just a couple of miles from my job. It was small, but it was perfect for what I needed. The best part? I managed to negotiate the price down by $10,000. I was thrilled. It was the culmination of all my hard work, all the sacrifices I'd made, and the painful lessons I'd learned. The moment I was handed the keys felt like a victory I'd earned on my own. I moved in as soon as I could. After years of living in my camper, I couldn't wait to set down roots. The house was everything I needed, and I even parked my truck behind the house to store the camper in the backyard, just in case I ever wanted to use it again. But that's when the story really takes a turn. I made the mistake of posting a picture of my new home on social media. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a little update to share my excitement. I didn't think anyone was paying much attention. But when my parents, Lucas, and his family showed up at my door unannounced a few weeks later, everything changed. I had no idea how they'd found out where I lived. I never gave them my address. But suddenly, they were at my doorstep, acting like it was just another regular visit. And as soon as they walked in, it was clear what they had in mind. My parents and Lucas acted like they had every right to be there, taking a tour of my home as if it was their own. It didn't take long before I realized that they had no intention of leaving without making demands. SL was the first to start making comments about the extra space in the house. She pointed out that it was too much for someone like me, someone without a wife or kids. I felt my blood begin to boil. The audacity. I didn't even have time to process their invasion before Lucas took me aside for a private conversation. He told me that his family needed a place to live because SL was pregnant again. And apparently, my house was the ideal solution. He went on to suggest that I could just live in the camper while they took over the house. They would need the space more than I did, after all. And if I didn't agree to let them move in, he reminded me my parents would be disappointed. As he spoke, he ignored every attempt I made to interject. It was like I wasn't even there. The nerve of Lucas was beyond anything I'd expected. He was speaking as though it was a done deal, as if I had no say in the matter. He mentioned that my parents had already talked to him about it, and this was just a formality. I was so furious, I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just an unreasonable request, it was an outright invasion of my space, my life, and my hard-earned peace. And what really got to me was that Lucas didn't even suggest paying rent or contributing in any way. He wanted to move in with his family and completely take over my house while I lived in a camper, like I had no other option but to accept it. I stood up, heart racing, and said, "Hell no," for the first time in a long while, and I meant it. Lucas stumbled back a bit, clearly shocked at the volume of my voice. It was like a switch had been flipped to me. I wasn't the kid anymore who was punished for speaking up. This was my home, and I would not let him or anyone else treat me like a doormat. I told him, in no uncertain terms, that this house wasn't going anywhere. It was mine, and it wasn't up for grabs just because they thought they deserved it. Lucas, of course, didn't back down. He got closer, trying to impose his presence on me. "You don't deserve all this space," he sneered. "You don't even have a family to fill it up." I was about to explode when I finally snapped. "I worked hard for this house. I sacrificed everything to get here, and you have no right to tell me what to do with it. You're the one who can't afford to live on your own, not me." But Lucas didn't take that well. He started yelling, trying to justify his entitlement. "I need a better place for my family. You have all this space and you don't need it. Why not let us live here?" It was the same line over and over. And then, in the most infuriating moment, he pulled the family first card. "I'm doing this for my kids," he yelled. "Then do it somewhere else," I shot back. "You have no idea what I've been through to get here. I don't owe you anything." That's when the door flew open and my parents and SL barged in like a storm. They surrounded me, trying to overwhelm me with their words, their demands, and their expectations. It was like they had planned this all along. SL started crying, claiming that I was being cruel to her and her kids, that I was ruining everything for them because she was pregnant again. She tried to manipulate me with her tears, but I wasn't buying it anymore. That's when things escalated even further. In the heat of the argument, SL, in a fit of rage, actually slapped me. It caught me by surprise, but I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and held it up, recording everything. "Don't think for a second that I'm going to let you get away with this," I told them. "I'll call the cops if you don't leave right now." The chaos only grew. My parents and Lucas kept pushing, and I could hear them repeating the same line over and over. "Just do it for Dan. Just do it for the kids." But I wasn't budging. I told them they didn't have a say in my life anymore. This wasn't their decision to make, and they weren't going to force me into something I didn't want. SL was still furious, yelling at me, but I stood firm. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into submission. She stormed out, crying, while Lucas tried one last time to convince me, but I had had enough. "Get out," I told them. "You don't belong here. I'm not doing this for you or anyone else. This is my house, and it's staying that way." My mother was the last to leave. As she walked out, she made one final remark: "You better do the right thing, or you'll regret it." I stared at her for a moment before responding, "I'm not doing anything for anyone. You've already taken enough from me. Don't come back." The door slammed shut behind them, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the situation lift. I had stood my ground, and I wasn't going to let anyone, family or otherwise, make me feel like I owed them anything.